I mean, it's called House of the Dragon, so you got to get a dragon right.
There wasn't that big cliffhangery moment at the end.
There's that massive dragon they always talk about. Is it like the Dread? And I'm like, are we going to see that massive dragon?
So, hi, I am David Othie. I am the acting TV editor at Digital Spy. I'm going to be honest, I have pretty much very little, practically no experience of Game of Thrones, to be honest. But I'm jumping in House of the Dragon and really enjoying what I've seen so far. So let me introduce everyone else. So we have Janet Lee, our TV writer.
Hi, yeah, I'm the TV writer for Digital Spy, and I was a huge Game of Thrones obsessive, like everybody else. Watched it when it was on, never missed an episode, and then had my heart broken in season 8. But we're here again in Westeros for another go at it, so I'm really excited.
Love it. And we're also joined by Emma Tinson, our deputy news editor.
Yeah, hi. Really excited to be talking about this new prequel series. I'm a big fan of Game of Thrones as well. I have to confess, I've never read the books, but big fan of the show. Unlike Janet, I wasn't as devastated by the final series. I feel like I was a little bit more lenient with it, but I totally understand it's very divisive. So it'll be interesting to see what the reaction is to this new series as well.
Absolutely. And finally, we're joined by Lawrence Montefari, our editor-in-chief at Digital Spy.
Hi, David. Yes, so I guess I'm a pretty huge Game of Thrones fan. So I remember writing a big oral history for our Digital Spy magazine last year, 2 years ago, and covered it extensively when it was out, coming to the finale. I remember we'd be doing a show like this, like a live stream every week after every episode. It was massive, like so many theories. Most of them weren't true. But yeah, it was really good fun, and I was lucky enough to go to the premiere of the House of Dragon as well, and really fun night, and really glad to see it back. I've only read 2 of the books, but they were so similar to the show, the original show. I was like, I can't be bothered to carry on. It's beat for beat. But I know they do separate more as it went on. But yeah, excited to have something Thronesy back in the world.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, House of the Dragon episode 1 is what we're talking about today. So much happened in just 1 hour. It's kind of hard to summarize, but basically we are going back in time, 172 years back, I believe, before the original Game of Thrones series, where we are seeing the Targaryens and their rise to power. But then there's also a lot of deceit. There's the usual betrayal. There's a lot of violence, a lot of sex. It's the standard. But by the end, there is some huge conflict with Uncle Daemon, played by Matt Smith. Who wants the crown, he wants the throne, but that's being actually given over to someone else, a female character, Rhaenyra, instead. So we're going to start by just talking about what we liked about it. What are our initial thoughts about it? Would anyone like to jump in first and just give an overview of their joy, or maybe they're not joy, for that first episode?
I mean, as the person who was most hurt by the Game of Thrones finale, I definitely went in with a lot of trepidation. I kind of was a middle of the road girl. Like, I don't really know what to expect. I'm not ready to trash it, but also at the same time, the series ending didn't leave me with much hope. So when I went in, I was tempering my excitement. And then episode 1 came, and it was magic. I felt like it was magic. I felt like it was perfection. I really want to be more critical and say something that was bad about it, but there wasn't. I loved it. I loved everything about it.
You gave it 5 stars, right?
I did give it 5 stars. I did. And I never give 5 stars. I always try and hold a little bit back just for a little bit of critical analysis, but I couldn't pick a fault with it. I couldn't.
Are we agreeing? 5 stars?
Well, this might be a good point for me to jump in. But no, I mean, it's great to see you loved it that much. I think with the finale, and it's really hard, I think, for this show to separate it off from the original because it was so big, it was so massive. But it looked as quality as the original for sure. Like the cinematography and stuff was amazing completely. I think for me, the things I always think about with Thrones are like, there was so much violence in it. It was really funny. Obviously, you said there was loads of sex in it and stuff, and I think I forgot some of those things that are in it so much. And then it was so violent. I was like, does it need all this violence? Like, I get it always had violence, but God, like so much violence. And also with the sex, like I get why that was a big feature of it originally. Like that's a big thing that HBO does quite a lot. And sometimes with new shows, just I don't know, maybe to pique interest, and it kind of phased off towards the later series. There wasn't quite as much of it. I felt. But yeah, I thought that it was maybe they felt they had to have as much violence, they had to have as much sex, just to kind of like repeat some of the maybe successful formulas from the previous. But in terms of things I really like Matt Smith. I wasn't sure if I would. Thought Matt Smith was really, really good. And Rhaenyra's, she was a big standout for me, and kind of as she came to the fore. But yeah, for me, I'm a bit undecided. I've only seen episode 1. I don't know if you've seen a little bit more, Janet. But so you that might be better things to come. But yeah, I feel like I like it. I'm hopeful. It's quite small scale, but I'm reserving to making a final decision on it just yet, because I feel like there's so much more to come. Hard to tell from episode 1, but yeah, it's definitely not as strong as episode 1 of Thrones, I think, because they have that huge twist at the end with Bran pushing out the window, the incest affair and stuff. So I was hoping there'd be a similar kind of big payoff moment. But yeah, I liked it, but I'm still not 100% decided. What did you think?
I disagree with a lot, but I'm going to wait for Emma to.
Okay.
I'm going to say something controversial here. The first episode of the original Game of Thrones series did not get me hooked. I know, like, there's a lot of people who really struggled with the first series. You know, there's a lot of long-winded conversations and stuff, but of course I eventually got sucked into this world. Whereas I think in contrast, this first episode of House of the Dragon, I feel like the pacing was actually a bit better. You're right, Lawrence, there wasn't that big cliffhangery moment at the end, but I feel like throughout the episode, there actually was a lot happening for, you know, whatever the runtime is at 60 minutes. A lot happened in that. We were introduced to these characters very quickly, and I feel that we did get invested in those characters. So I am kind of excited to see what happens next, even though there wasn't that big OMG moment at the end of the episode. But I would say, like, I agree with you, Lawrence, with the whole kind of shock to the system thing. I think because it's been so many years since Game of Thrones ended, I had kind of forgotten how violent it could be and how very over the top it could be at times. So that was kind of a bit of a whoa moment for me watching at home. But yeah, I'm definitely really interested to see what happens next. I think the cast is really strong. So I'm really believing each of these characters. I'm really interested to see how their journey goes and how they develop more going forward. So yeah, excited for more, I think.
It's interesting, there's the violence and kind of sex talking about, because obviously that was such a huge talking point. Is it gratuitous? Is it central to the plot? For me, obviously, as a new person coming in, I was aware that this was going to be a thing. But I feel like a lot of it did feel kind of integral to the plot. Maybe not so much when the guard were coming in and murdering everyone and there was that messed up scene. But in terms of like the birth scene in particular, I found that really horrific and unsettling, but it also felt very, like, it was moving the plot forward in a very important way, showing the brutality behind these decisions that these like royal monarchs are making. So it's a fine line, right? Like, we don't want to be exploitative, but equally people are expecting this from the show. So it's finding ways to make this organic without offended. And some people are going to be offended. I guess you're not going to please everyone at the end of the day. But yeah, it was interesting. I know, Janet, I think you have some similar thoughts on that.
Yeah.
You've done some great stuff on it already.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with a lot of that. I agree with Emma in the sense of season 1 of Game of Thrones was very slow paced, but I think we have to understand that they were doing a lot of world building there, a lot of things that we needed to understand about Westeros, about the houses and about how they integrated with each other. So I think that was necessary. And then that cliffhanger moment at the end of Game of Thrones season 1 was just to be like, okay, there's a lot more here. Don't leave us now. Whereas by comparison, House of Dragons, they kind of hit us at different stages throughout the episode. And I thought that the violence was well placed. Like, I think it revealed a lot about the characters and their relationship, especially there wasn't very much talk around Daemon's one because the birth scene was so horrific, but Daemon's violent scene with the gold cloaks going in and like slaughtering everybody. I thought that was really pivotal to who he was and how impulsive he is and how rash he is. And it then reveals the relationship between him and his brother and how he deals with Daemon and his antics as well. So I thought that it was very well placed in that sense. And then the birth scene, that was very hard to watch. Like, I literally had my hands over my eyes, gripping things. It was really, really gruesome, but I think it just made his decision and what Viserys did and what he went through even more, it made it harder to not harder, it made it easier to understand how that would impact him so greatly, because he loved his wife so much and then selfishly chose the throne over her and did something so horrific. We needed to see what she went through in order to see why or how it will later break him down. So I thought that was important. And then again, I liked the sex scene because it wasn't all salacious and romping and steamy. It was more, again, about revealing something about Daemon and how he may come across as this, you know, hard guy. He may come across as somebody who's like really confident, but really, he's really insecure. And I liked that that's what it was revealing, like these scenes were revealing something about the characters that we didn't know and their journey. So yeah, I'm here for it. I'm waiting to see what they do.
I mean, they were salacious too, but
yeah,
like a why not both meme, right? It's like, it's salacious, but it also is plot driven.
I mean, I thought the sex scene was very like tame in Game of Thrones comparison. I was like, okay, but I get why you've done this and I get why it's gone this way. It wasn't necessary for it to be so titillating. Yeah.
It's interesting, all this comparison talk between the first two episodes, and I wonder if House of the Dragon was first, because obviously chronologically it's first, do we think this premiere would have brought people in the same way? You know, if you were completely new to this world on screen, would this have been as successful a series as the Game of Thrones we know, just based off this first episode so far?
I do think it would have been really different, to be honest. Like, as Janet said, we're already invested in this world and there isn't as much world building to be done, which is perhaps why the pace of this episode was so much speedier in comparison to the original. But yeah, I mean, it'll be interesting to see if there are any newbies who come to this without having ever watched any Game of Thrones before, if they just come to this prequel series, such as yourself, David. But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what the reaction is. But absolutely, I think having, as us being, you know, Game of Thrones fans, we have so much more knowledge. We know, you know, when a certain name pops up or a certain phrase or a reference, we already know what that means and what it's teasing towards. So there is that kind of extra benefit we have as viewers, having that pre-knowledge, I suppose.
Definitely. Is there, looking back at that premiere, is there anything that stood out that we haven't discussed yet in terms of characters or moments that you think should be highlighted at this point?
I mean, I was expecting, it was great to see more dragons. So going back to kind of the first episode, the first series, and the differences of the start of Thrones, I think what they did well with the original Game of Thrones in the early days is they went very magic and very light on all those elements that were, I guess, you know, outside of the real world. And then kind of build that in later once everyone was hooked on. It was the strength of the characters that really got everyone on board. And so with this, when they're like, okay, here's a dragon straight away and here's another dragon, I thought there would be more dragons. I'm sure there's loads throughout the season, but that felt like a big difference to me in how the original went to this. I kind of was trying to get my head around the timeline before it started, and I was like, oh, there's that massive dragon they always talk about. Is it like the Dread? And I'm like, are we going to see that massive dragon? And I was like, oh no, he's even pre this. So I'm still waiting one day to see that, the mega dragon. It was good to see his skull still around.
See that skull? There's that big skull thing. This must mean something.
Yeah. So that's in the sort of original Game of Thrones series. But yeah, it was great to see, you know, because those were built up for so long in Game of Thrones. It was like a running joke. They didn't have enough budget to do the dragons, so it's interesting to see them straight from the off in there. But yeah, I guess the big theory and tie into the prince that was promised and stuff, a big thing that was discussed in the original Game of Thrones. I did wonder, like, for someone like yourself, David, that might just be like, okay. And even as someone that's seen Game of Thrones, I was like, okay, this might tie into that. I don't know yet the big ramifications throughout House of the Dragon, how that all ties in and how significant that is. But even from what I know just off of that one episode, it didn't feel like the hugest revelation to me. But it was nice to have that tie-in, but that felt very much for the fans of the original more so than the newbies, for sure.
Yeah, it was interesting because I'm in a weird position where, yeah, I haven't watched it really, but equally I've worked at places where it's often been a talking point. So like I have this weird like bits I know. So I was like, I feel that this is important. This is a thing I need to talk about. I need to Google this thing after. So yeah, I think it was interesting, like from what I read afterwards, how it kind of reframes things to an extent. I know, Janet, you talked about that a bit in an article about how.
Yeah, I know there was a lot of talk in, I can't even remember which season, probably season 8 of Game of Thrones, whether the prince that was promised was actually a princess. Was it Daenerys? Was it Jon Snow because he's fire and ice? Sounds like we're talking about something really ridiculous, fire and ice. Anyway, and so I kind of thought that it could possibly have insinuated that the prince who was promised was perhaps not maybe one character, but the two of them together. So that was interesting for me to kind of go down that thought process. Or maybe it wasn't a character, a monarch bringing Westeros together in order to fight the Night King. It was the combination of Daenerys and Jon Snow. So that was kind of interesting to kind of tease out and think about. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to more tidbits like that and just seeing where my Game of Thrones knowledge may be a bit rusty, or maybe it will come forth, or what it will rejig in me. So I'm excited for that.
See, I thought with that theory that maybe, and I could be completely wrong, and I think a bit like you need to swat up more on the law. But yeah, I thought maybe because there was that idea a Targaryen has to be on the throne to deliver this princess promised thing, maybe there was like a duty for a Targaryen to be on the throne, and maybe because of how things went with Daenerys at the end of Game of Thrones and her, you know, being turned into a villain as such, it like gave like a divine destiny to this thing she had to do. She had to have this massive journey because she knew in the long run.
But did she know?
Well, that's what I guess we'll find out. But I didn't know whether there's a thing. All Targaryens need to know. You need to be on the throne because eventually it's going to pay off and do a good thing. Whether that's the way they were going with it or not, I don't know. But that was why I wondered. Perhaps.
Yeah, that's what I picked up. But then I wondered, because of the way things went and the Mad King and how Viserys II and Daenerys were exiled, did they even have this information? Did they have this knowledge? So yeah, I've been in Game of Thrones land for quite some time now, so this is exciting.
It's funny, isn't it? I feel like we all need to do a bit of homework before we watch more of this. One other thing I just wanted to pick up on that I'm really excited about going forward with this series, being a big girl power advocate, is the kind of role of gender. It was obviously a big thing in the original Game of Thrones series, and Daenerys being a strong but controversial leader herself. And obviously it's already in this first episode, we're seeing so much surrounding that and the role of women in this universe. And I think that's why, I mean, as Janet was saying, that birth scene was so horrific to watch, but it was such an important scene. So yeah, there's a lot of characters that I'm keeping my eye on, who I'm interested to see going forward. And can we just take a moment to appreciate how horrible Otto Hightower is? You know, he just sends off his daughter to be like, oh yeah, go cheer up the king in his bedroom. And while you're at it, get into the dress of your dead mother. I'm like, I watched that moment and I was like, no, this isn't happening. But yeah, I think Alicent's going to be a really interesting character to watch going forward. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how these women kind of react to this difficult situation they're in. So yeah, lots of excitement.
I'm hoping that's a big focus for this season, because I think there's a lot of people that felt Daenerys was not handled the right way. They were disappointed how that played out and stuff. It was leading in such a great direction and stuff. And I think, I hope, and I imagine that's a big thing they'll be looking to rectify in this season. I'm
trying to measure my comments because I've watched more than I should have.
Oh no.
I couldn't help it. I was like, I'll just watch episode 2, and then it spiraled. So I'm withholding.
Okay, we've got a warning there.
Yeah,
absolutely. But yeah, I think that's a good point as well in terms of just fan response, right? Like the fan response to Game of Thrones was intense and fierce, no matter whether it was positive or negative. I mean, especially towards the end, obviously quite negative. So I can imagine there's a lot of pressure on the House of Dragon writers, not just following up such a big show, but also how do we fix, as it were, all the issues from before in an organic way that still makes sense in this world. And also picking up on what you were saying earlier, Emma, about gender, I think it's going to be, I'm really interested to see Emma Darcy as a non-binary actor moving forward, and how that interplay between the performer and the characters, because clearly gender is a really key aspect of this character too, and how they don't conform in a very traditional way in terms of royalty and tradition. So yeah, I'm super excited. I know Janet knows more, so
I won't say. Don't look. I won't give anything away. Good poker face.
Well, maybe Janet, you could give away something perhaps from the junket, because you spoke to a lot of the stars, and I wondered, was there any little tidbits or highlights you'd love to share at this point?
I thought it was really interesting talking to Emma Darcy and Olivia Cook, because I was really interested in the characters' relationships and how it's going to dip so drastically. And it was really nice to hear from them about their characters and how they spoke about the love that they had for each other and that they shared for each other, and that they were each other's first loves, and how that was really strong. And then considering how things are going to slowly unravel, it makes it all the more difficult to watch. I think something I learned from the junket that I wasn't expecting was more about Damon's character, though, in the sense of, I don't know about you guys, but when I first saw him, I just thought, he's after the throne, he's arrogant, he's overly confident, bar the sex scene where we realize there's a little bit more to him. But I thought he was literally just out for power. And then having spoken to Matt Smith about it, where he speaks about how there's a love between him and his brother, and how actually he really just wants to go back to a time where they're just goofing around and they're just really good friends and really good buddies and they have each other's backs. But there is this thing of the throne and the reign that is pulling them apart. It made me understand his character a little bit more and have a little bit more sympathy for him, in the sense of, he just wants his brother's approval. He just wants a relationship with him, and a little bit of power. We're not going to lie. He wants a little bit. Yeah, lots of power. So that was nice to kind of talk through, because it gave me a different insight into the character initially that I didn't have.
Think of Matt Smith in terms of, I know he's done a lot of stuff since, but I feel like for a lot of people he is kind of Doctor Who still, especially for a lot of our readers. And I wondered, do we think he inhabits this more sinister, messed up role a bit like effectively, or are you just seeing, oh, Doctor Who's gone a bit bad?
I thought that'd be the case to start with. But I mean, he did an incredible job in The Crown, though, is what I'd say. But I did think that to start with. And also, he's got a very strong look, and he's so I think he's very recognisable as himself, if that makes sense. But I think, as the episode went on, I was surprised by how much I liked Matt Smith. I thought he embodied it well. And it's really interesting to hear what Janet's saying about the nuances of that character. I think it could be taken at face value as a bit of just chin scratching, whoa, like baddie. But like, if there's more depth to him, I'm really excited to see that. And I think as a side note, I thought his costume looked incredible during like the jousting scene, because it looks like all dragon stuff. And as an aesthetic, that could be really daft. He could end up looking like a Power Ranger. I thought they like tied just the right line. And it looked like a potential maybe cool armor that you'd have.
Agreed. Yeah, let's talk about the visuals more, because obviously it's a stunning world. But how do we feel about the CGI, that world building in a very visual CGI sense as well?
I really, really, really liked the dragons. And I know, like Lawrence said, they had a bigger budget to work with. But I think it's so important to get that right. I mean, it's called House of the Dragon, so you've got to get a dragon right. And it could have been silly, and they could have, like, the movement of the dragons was so organic and so natural that it was really fun to see. Like, you really just get swept away in this world. And I thought that was a nice added bonus. I thought the Game of Thrones dragons were good, but this was, it was great. I loved it.
I think you're right, Janet, as well. Like, there was that pressure for them, because I think, Game of Thrones was really a TV series that changed television. It was one of the first really big cinematic series, and I don't think we'd really seen anything of that level before, so that was a huge pressure for them to get it right, as with many other things with the plot and the cast and everything as well. But with the CGI and the visuals, people are expecting this high standard, so there must have been such a huge pressure to get that right. But yeah, I mean, as Lawrence said before, always good to see more dragons. We want more of that, please. But yeah, it looks great so far. And obviously all of the sets and the locations look fantastic as well. So it is kind of just a visual treat for us as viewers.
There's not many dragons in Game of Thrones now. I'm like, when I want to go I want constant dragon action, and clearly that's not what I'm gonna get.
There's more as it goes on, and I think the thing they did well with the dragons in Game of Thrones was they were rationed, so it was special when they appeared. So I think they kind of like, okay, we'll have them in this one episode of these couple, and then they'll go big on those dragon moments, and then towards the end they just go bananas. But also towards the end there was kind of this feeling that the dragons had a personality themselves, which I think was really interesting. So I'm hoping, I don't know, I'll wait for Janet's facial reaction, but I'm hoping that's something that could interplay with this. Maybe you could do that, even though they don't speak or anything. It's not Dragonheart, but they kind of, they had little personalities and mannerisms and stuff you got from them. I think just to go back to the visuals as well, that the jousting scene, I think because then you've seen a million jousting scenes and a million medieval things over time. I thought that came across especially brutal, and the sound of it and the things breaking and the sort of close-up shots and the thuds of people going down. It was, you kind of really got the brutality of something you've probably seen a million times. It's actually, in terms of the grandness that Game of Thrones can be, and compared to a dragon, two guys jousting on horses, pretty small scale. But I thought even the way that was filmed came across as incredibly brutal and loud, I thought.
I think it was kind of the brutality of that scene as well was kind of really well mirrored, because it was kind of happening at the same time as the really horrific birth scene. So we were kind of chopping between the two. So that whole section of the episode was kind of a bit of a explosion for the senses in a way. It was all of this blood and gore happening in very quick succession.
And they were both very intimate moments in very different ways, like, especially the way the camera was like, it was very much in their faces with the jousting, and then also horribly close up with the birth scene too. So yeah, very impactful. I think maybe a standout moment from the series that we'll find out as time goes on. Janet knows. And also a funeral scene with the mother, and then the dragon kind of comes down the hill and sets her alight. I don't know, there's a hint there for me that there's something more perhaps going on there as well. I just love to see how they kind of fit organically in this world, because I think that's not easy to do. Otherwise you get the Aragorns and the Dragonhearts of the world, as you said.
Well, because I guess there's a kind of dichotomy where, like, dragons are like nuclear weapons. Like, you shouldn't really have nuclear weapons. You shouldn't be able to control nuclear weapons, but they do and they exist. And I think they even say in this episode, like, we shouldn't have had the dragons, shouldn't be able to control the dragons. So I think, and then you add a personality to that, and that's this whole uncontrolled, where anything can happen with it, plus whoever is wielding them. I think that there's something potentially really interesting there. I
mean, that was a really pivotal moment and an important moment, as you said, David. But I think a lot of Thrones fans will have been excited over just hearing that command of Dracarys, even though it was a very somber moment. But a lot of people will have been watching and going, oh, yes, I know what that means. So yeah, it was a really interesting scene, a very powerful scene as well. But yeah, more dragons, please. I want to see more of the baby dragons back from whatever series 3 or something of Game of Thrones. There's baby dragons. David, you're missing out on so much.
I don't even know. Oh my goodness. Well, speaking of more dragons, what else do we want to see? I mean, we're only on episode 1. There's so much more to come. What are we hoping to see? What do we expect to see?
I want to find out more about the other houses. So I doubt we'll get House Tully. Maybe not. I want more from House Lannister. I want more from the Starks. I want to see their histories and how, because obviously everything comes to a head by the time we've reached Game of Thrones, and we very much know who's in power. And we know that the Targaryens' power that dips, and we know about Robert Baratheon's rebellion. But I want to see how those pieces come together slowly. So that's what I've got my eye out for, the houses.
I'd like to see more humour. I think that's the thing that I'm missing. Like, I go back to the point earlier, I'm not a prude around there being violence and sex. That's a core part of the show, and I think it's great when it's earned, and that should definitely be in there. But that other key piece for me was humour, and I think humour can do a lot of legwork for new audiences to bring people in, and it kind of just brings a bit of levity. It just balances out, I think, sometimes the really like harsh reality they're living in. But yeah, more humour, and whether that will come through one character or spread across everyone, I'd like to see more of it. And I think as well, there was some, and this is super Game of Thrones nerdy, but there was some kind of plot elements like the faceless men and things that were touched on in Thrones that were really interesting and then kind of drops. So if there's a way that plays into, even if it's this season or future seasons, those kind of really, like the stone men and just other areas and stuff, I think it'd be great to see more of that and delve into some of those more, and then hopefully see more of them.
I think for me, what I want to see more of is just the sort of like hints and sort of teases that we've had so far just being fulfilled a bit more. Obviously, you know, we've not seen much in the first episode, but there's been references, and I'm hoping that they're not just references for the sake of references just to please the fans. I hope that there is something that's going to be developed there and a bit more that's going to happen, because that is a very easy thing to do with a prequel series or anything like that with any franchise, is to just have those kind of throwaway lines in there. So I'm hoping that we'll see a little bit more of an explanation, but we can only wait and find out.
I thought maybe just before we wrap up, it might be nice, Janet, if you could perhaps tease in a very non-spoilery, fulfilling the embargo, not annoying anyone, but still give something juicy kind of tease for what's coming ahead.
What can I tell you? The relationships are about to get really complex, as we know, even more uncomfortably so. And there's one character who we don't see a lot from initially in this first episode, who turns out to be more pivotal than I imagined. So,
dun dun dun, love it.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on those YouTube notifications so you can follow along with House of the Dragon every week with Digital Spy. Thank you very much. Bye.